Hello everyone, I'm Helen Wilson, Global Chief Experience Officer for our Ipsos Customer Experience and Channel Performance business, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to our Ipsos Global Voices of Experience 2023 webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, we had over 1,000 people register for this webinar, and it is just fantastic to have so many of you with us here today. So, Global Voices of Experience. Today we'll be sharing a flavour of the findings of our recent Ipsos research among CX professionals, and this year we also spoke to EX professionals from across the world, which has led to some really fascinating insights. We'll be delving into the current state of play in customer and employee experience, levels of experience management maturity, challenges, and of course those top opportunities for CX and EX practitioners where there's still work to be done, and of course, on a positive note, the opportunities that lie ahead. Now, many of our teams are hosting regional and market events. Well, they'll dive into local findings, but today we'll give you that global view, pulling out points of particular interest by market, region, sector, and so on. But do look out for those local invites too. Now, we'll be sure to share this recording and the deck with you, but of course, do feel free to take those screenshots, share on social media, but if you will be kind enough to use the hashtag Global Voices of Experience and to tag Ipsos, that would be much appreciated. And of course, do put your questions in the chat. It's in a fairly obvious place on this platform. And if we don't get back to you in this session, we'll aim to get back to you directly. So, I'd like to introduce my co-speakers. We have Nicolas Freitas, and he heads up Experience and Channel Performance in LATAM. Hello, Nico. Nico and his team are the brains behind Global Voices. They're the people who made this work. So thank you to Nico and the team based in Chile for bringing this to life. And we have Stephanie Banos, who leads our US experience business. Now, both my colleagues they're absolute experts. They've been doing this a long time in all aspects of experience management. But you may just note the excitement levels rising when Steph gets to speak digital experience, and when she gets to speak AI and indeed all things tech. That's some of her very favorite topics. So, we've gathered the views of CX and EX professionals from across multiple markets and sectors, and we have the data to enable us to deep dive into many of those groups. In terms of our respondent base, we have pure CXers, pure EXers, those focusing on their specific disciplines, and we also have those with responsibilities across both EX and CX. Enough of me. Let's head on to see what those experienced professionals are telling us. I'd like to pass on to you, Nico, to lead us in with that overall perspective, the state of play, as it were.
Thank you, Helen. And there's no doubt that CX and EX are growing in terms of importance in the C-suite of all of the organizations. You can see that the recognition is going up, but we still hear that some companies are falling short in their delivery. You can see that it's interesting that 82% of the CX professionals through all over the world say that companies that continue to invest in CX will outperform their competitors. But also, if we expand this to that 60% of XM, which is EX and CXers together, they also expect that the boardroom is going to have a broader look into everything that's happening in this space. But you can see also that there's a 28% that admit that their delivery is generally worse than the promise they've made to the clients. You can see that the recognition levels are high, but they jump into 92% in North America and in Europe. And Steph is going to tell you a little bit more about that later. As the value of CX continues to grow, we can now focus on implementing more specific initiatives. There's an expectations that CX and EX investments are going to go up. They're going to go up by 52%. This number is up 17% compared to last year. These investments also require that teams are able to deliver. So training is a key area on where they're going to be focusing their teams to handle this more complex customer experience coming through the future. Expenditure on CX and EX is also intended to go high, and this will require higher teams and bigger teams to be able to act on them. It's pretty clear that getting the CX right is a tough thing. If we take a closer look at CX performance in 2023, you can see that only 13% of the CX professionals say that they've seen big improvements in their CX performance, and 20% they state that they've seen a drop. You can look at different sectors. Automotive is leading the way, 53% of improvements. Retailers are at 52, financial services at 45. So there's sectors that probably have nailed it. But what we can see is that these results tell us that there's still a lot of room of improvement, especially when it comes to translate the CX insights into tangible improvements. So now to the big question from the boardroom. What is this investment gives us back in terms of return? CXers confirm that those who get it right see those financial rewards. 63% of those CX practitioners that saw big improvements in their CX performance evidence a small or a big improvement in their financial performance. But being able to prove this ROCE, which is return on customer experience, is still not a done deal for many of organizations. Still, very few of them have truly been able to unlock the power of linking business performance to ROCE. Only 28% tell us that they have been not able to establish day-to-day connections of their business with their data of return. On the other side, 15% have been able to create those really sophisticated models to quantify this link on a continuous basis. What appears clear on all of the findings is that companies who are able to establish this link between CX business performance are able to increase their budgets and get more support of the leadership teams. You can see that the advance of the practice of CX relates to CX maturity of the organization and how well you can perform in these 7 core competences of XM. On the top there, you can see that only 15% of CX practitioners position their organization on leading based on our Ipsos CX maturity framework. 47% is practiced and 38% being foundational, which is the initial level. When we started this on 2021, leading was at 13 and foundational was at 40. So you can see that maturity is growing, but it's growing slowly. We always get asked the same question about benchmarks, where we can find those like really big industries or markets that we can go there and have a look. But what we can see is that you cannot find in the world a specific market or specific sector that has these superior levels of maturity. It's more about scattered brands all over the place that have really focused and invested in CX and have turned on their game. It's really important for organizations who are in the foundation of the practice to gain this clear view on what the current gaps are and to be able to achieve their desired state. We'll come back to those priorities in a moment. But before we do that, we can have a look at what's happening, for example, in a difference between B2B and B2C. You can see that maturity levels vary per sector and that there's differences here, even if leading is similar. In B2B, the percentage of brands that are in foundational is up higher. If we briefly comment on CPG brands, for example, today CPG stand at 49% foundational, which is the very initial state. But we should expect that as they continue to have more B2B relationships becoming more complex, and also as some of them expand into direct-to-consumer platform or services, they're going to start growing in their CX maturity. It will be interesting to follow up what's happening with B2B moving forward. The advance of level of maturity and brands, it's connected to excelling in these 7 CXM practices. You can see that there's consistency between the practices and the maturity levels. Customer understanding is one area which has higher development than others, while evidence impact and ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, are lagging behind. Coming from that, you can see that evidence impact in B2C, for example, is at 40% foundational, while in B2B, it's at 47% foundational. On the other side, ESG, that has become a very popular topic and has jumped into the corporate agenda, is also behind in its development. Almost half of the respondents state that they're in the foundational stage. 50% foundational in North America, 49% foundational in Europe. If we have a look at the ESG practices, you can see that ESG is quite broad, and we can evidence that there's an uneven deployment of all of this ESG practice. Gender, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation practices have been more addressed by companies, while being able to demonstrate these ESG commitments through the experience delivered to customer is still only being mastered by 1 out of 4 organizations. If you want to read more about this, you can just jump on to ipsos.com and have a look at this Ipsos View white paper, where we talk about embedding ESG in the organization and within the experience. But we'll start with the deep dish for this, which are the key takeaways. So you can see that no matter what's happening with the different organizations, there's still a lot to do in terms of geographies and industries. The maturity, the companies who are more mature are reaping benefits, but there's clear priorities happening all over the place. CX practitioners' top priorities are in line with what we saw last year: developing the CX strategic roadmap, mastering personalization to be able to gain the relevance that today this has facing omnichannel journeys and the emergence of AI, and also closing the brand promise gap. On the other side, a big topic today is AI and tech. It's there in the agenda, but it's one of the main challenges. AI is in all of the front covers. Everybody's talking about that, but let's talk later on what the potential impact this is going to have for the experience and its implications. EX and CX, they're coming together, but they're coming together in a slow rate. It's still in its infancies. We'll be able to show you how the EX maturity is also low and how it relates to the CX maturity. There's major ground to cover in this space if we want to really make true the promise or the premise that strongly engaged employees will boost the delivery of exceptional customer experience. So now I'll hand it to Steph so she can take us through all of these key takeaways.
Excellent. Thank you, Nico. Thank you everyone for joining us today. So let's go ahead and dive into that first one around the CX practitioner priorities. So here you'll see how those 3, developing or refining a strategic roadmap, delivering personalization, and closing the gap between the brand promise and the experience, stand pretty far above the rest. Anecdotally, all year we've been reworking strategies with clients to accommodate shifting business conditions. So it's really not that surprising to see 50% of CX practitioners prioritizing their strategic roadmap. Considering many CX initiatives have been in flux throughout COVID and this year with economic uncertainty, that roadmap of prioritized activities has indeed needed frequent grooming. As for personalization, of course, the main discussion right now is around how to incorporate Gen AI. Now, us as CX practitioners have an advantage because machine learning and AI has been used in personalization for nearly a decade. So all of the business functions now, considering Gen AI, the CX teams are actually the ones who are most ready to hit the ground running with new experimental use cases. So go us as CX practitioners. When reviewing these results, I was most intrigued to see the desire to close the gap between the brand promise and delivery. We recently published a research piece showing how important this is, which we can send to you as part of the webinar recap. It's actually a really important priority, so really great to see it on here because missing, meeting, or exceeding expectations has a direct effect on revenue, and that ROXY analysis that Nico was talking about shows that connection too. So if we dive a bit further in, we can see that across the different maturity levels Nico mentioned, the rankings of these top 3 priorities is pretty consistent. Of course, more mature or leading organizations need to do less on their strategic roadmaps and closing the gap on the brand promise, but at over 40%, it's certainly not a low priority. This is great to see because one of the core qualities of leading CX organizations is their commitment to continuous optimization and innovation in experience design. So let's talk a little bit about the role of governance in defining and driving a CX roadmap. This year, we worked with several clients on reinventing their CX governance model. And I speak with clients about this all of the time and how critical it is for a good governance model to drive CX outcomes. CX as a transversal discipline is very much still emerging, but as you can see here, 39% of brands have cracked the code on governance, and another 48% are getting there. For that 48% though, it's really not time to celebrate if you read the fine print on this slide. Structure without accountability and clear definition on objectives makes for slow decision-making and a constant uphill battle. So my advice to anyone in this situation is to take the initiative to bring the right players to the table to drive alignment on your CX agenda. 9 times out of 10, there is more inherent alignment on customer centricity than you realize. And selfishly for your careers, when you as the CX practitioner are the one who's pioneering cohesion across the different parts of the business, you quickly rise to prime visibility with executive leadership. Moving on to personalization. The best way to look at this chart is that the lower maturity actions are at the top and the leading actions are at the bottom. So it's outstanding to see that advanced strategies for personalization are now the majority. As consumers, I think we feel that, right? I think that we can all say that the relevancy of messages that we receive, quality of recommendations, channel consistency when we're engaging with brands, and the speed to resolution and service interactions has continued to improve over the years and across sectors. One of my favorite parts about the CX discipline is also how adjacent innovation, that is taking inspiration from brands across sectors, is uniquely applicable to us. And it's that adjacent innovation that is rising the tide across all sectors as they deliver great and amazing customer experiences. So I love when clients are open to considering logos outside of their sector when doing competitive CX studies. So as an example, right, when we do this, we discover really amazing avenues to elevate the experience, because you're not just looking within your immediate competitive set, you're looking at leading brands and thinking about how to apply those leading CX strategies within your sector. And that's how you start to leapfrog competition. So always love to see brands that are open to that. As for the 6% we see here around AI and predictive analytics adoption, my hypothesis is that this is going to explode over the next 12 months as Gen AI use cases go live. So Helen, we should probably do a pulse check on this later in the year rather than waiting all the way until next summer. So before I move on, I'll underscore that you must continue to invest in personalized experiences or you absolutely will fall behind. And this chart depicts that. So if you're making a budget case right now to your leadership around technology and data investments, take a screenshot of this page, wait for us to send the report, but definitely use this slide. All right, lastly, of the top priorities, we see that 58% of teams believe their experiences are in line with the brand promise, but more than double feel it's worse than better. Honestly, this is alarming. Nearly a third of participants feel their company is missing expectations. With my consumer hat on, honestly, that's probably about right. But wow, do we as CX professionals need to do something about that? I mentioned earlier a different research study that we had done earlier this year tying the brand promise to CX. So here's a little bit of a teaser on that. We measured 3 dimensions: how well the brand promise resonates, whether the experience meets expectations, and the level of satisfaction that a consumer reports. In the first bar, we can see that when the brand promise resonates and the experience exceeds expectations, 88% of customers are very or extremely satisfied with the brand. So no surprise there, right? This is where it gets interesting. In the second bar, even when the brand promise misses the mark in terms of resonating, but the experience exceeds expectations, still more than half of consumers are very or extremely satisfied. So the experience is really carrying the weight of the brand here. In the third bar, it's the inverse. The brand resonates exceedingly well, but the experience is worse than expected. This is the lowest performing. In this scenario, only 38% still report being satisfied. The conclusion here is that both the experience and brand equity play a role in satisfaction, but the experience has a greater bearing. So keep working on closing that gap. All right, moving on to one of my favorite topics, as Helen called out, having the right data and technology to have impact at scale. Okay, So I'm going to start with what's not a stated challenge, or a lower priority stated challenge. CX practitioners are telling us that they aren't worried about some of the key themes that have dominated headlines since the start of the year: inflation, supply chain, ESG. Their concerns are more fundamental. It's getting the omni-channel journey right, leveraging AI effectively, and investing in the right technology to listen to and communicate with customers. So getting to true omni-channel understanding and related journey orchestration requires a significant investment in data architecture and integrations. It can be done, and nearly 20% of brands are saying that they've done it. Digitally native brands tend to have an advantage here because they built their business foundation with this in mind. My caution to the 64% who are still getting there is that 100% integration and bilateral data flows and all data in one place might not actually be required. I could speak about this for hours, so I'll leave you with two pieces of advice. One, make sure how you're collecting data across channels is consistent. Taxonomies are sexy. Why? Because they make everything else so much easier. A strong data collection strategy will save you from master data management nightmares down the line, trust me. Two, focus on the moments in the experience you need to measure and understand, and the customer use cases that you want to deliver. That is, start with a use case driven strategy and prioritize your data integrations around the data you need to power your vision. Simply throwing everything into a data lake and calling that integration that powers the business will prove very disappointing very fast. So I'll get off my soapbox, but here's another way to look at the same concept. Without complete channel integration, as evidenced on the previous slide, data integration is also challenged. So these two go hand in hand, but they're not necessarily one for one. And I'll show you why on the next slide. So here's how this plays out. In the top bar, where respondents said that there is complete division across channels, most data is siloed, and the 6% that exists in a data ecosystem is largely manual and often unreliable. When silos exist with data, silos exist with decision making. And going back to my earlier point on governance, if the data is siloed, then the users are siloed into their product and channel ownership areas, and coming together on shared CX objectives is resultingly challenged. So the teams are literally and quite fully operating in their own worlds, their own ecosystems. Conversely, on the bottom chart, where there is full integration of channels, 54% of respondents feel they have a fully humming data ecosystem. But why are 42% only somewhat successful? Probably because the way they're collecting data across channels is inconsistent or lacks integrity. Garbage in, garbage out, as they say. And like I said, taxonomies are sexy. So pulling this all together, a few slides ago, I showed that 48% of CX practitioners said improving omni-channel journeys is their main challenge. Yet only 10% of respondents can claim both full channel integration and full data integration. So it's no surprise that achieving omni-channel experience understanding and delivery is the top stated challenge. So what does it take? Governance. Omni-channel's closest friend is omni-business functions working together. So thank you to Nico's team for going back to the data and testing my hypothesis rather last minute, because I wanted to call out the point about accountability and how accountability is a prerequisite to success. So look at this. Where a formal governance model is in place without accountability, 60% of respondents reported silo data and lack of channel integration. But simply adding accountability changes the tune, and 62% have full integration and a robust data ecosystem. So next time someone in your organization talks about your role being one of influence, point to this, or give me a call, and I'm more than happy to talk to any CEO or CMO about how formalizing accountability around the customer experience really does matter. Okay, to wrap up my section, let's talk about AI. So as CX practitioners, all of this buzz about AI makes us feel like we're living in the twilight zone. We've been experimenting with AI for nearly a decade. In fact, I'm at the Salesforce Dreamforce conference this week. This is not my wallpaper at home. This is a hotel room. And I was looking at the Einstein tool, which I have used in the past in my career, and I realized Einstein was launched in 2016. So many of us CX practitioners have been using AI for, like I said, nearly a decade. So as we start to talk about generative AI, which is definitely new, right? The same principles of testing and learning into beneficial use cases completely and fully still applies. So you can see here that 43% of respondents are already using AI in some way. And surely we would expect these numbers to increase dramatically when we repeat this study next year. All this said, I encourage you to push for lead roles in your company's Gen AI strategies, since really it's CX practitioners and performance marketers who have the most experience in this space and can drive the fastest impact in a responsible way. Drilling a bit further, what's especially interesting about AI and very promising about the application of generative AI is that brands of all maturity levels here have a pretty similar profile of AI integration. The AI we're using today as CX practitioners is embedded in SaaS technologies like Salesforce and listening platforms and other marketing automation platforms. So the broader accessibility of Gen AI for analytics and insights, combined with the access that we're used to within the platforms we have as they further embed Gen AI capabilities for personalization, journey management, and so forth, is just going to lead to a massive explosion of how AI is leveraged within CX. And as Helen said, I am extremely excited for what's to come. Okay, so speaking about analytics and insights and what is possible with Gen AI, Ipsos is at the forefront. With our proprietary Gen AI tool, Ipsos Facto, we are pulling together leading Gen AI technologies for our own internal solution. So with this specific study, rather than leveraging our standard practices for translating open ends across the globe into English, and then having our statisticians apply our text analytics models, one of our non-technical colleagues put the raw, untranslated open ends directly into Ipsos Facto to see what it told us. So we found 4 themes on how respondents are putting AI to work. Data analysis on large data sets, both descriptive and predictive, real-time personalization, and in fact, Gen AI opens the door to real one-on-one personalization, which has previously been limited, being a tool for internal use to increase productivity, efficiency, and accuracy, such as what we did with Ipsos Facto here, and powering service interactions to assist customers in real time. If AI use cases were limited to just these 4, imagine the impact it would have on both the top and bottom line. So that's pretty incredible. And our experience with Ipsos Facto falls largely into that first category, data analysis. It was fast, accurate, and enabled someone without technical skills to arrive at meaningful insights. This means less time getting to the insight and more time thinking about the business implication and the strategic recommendations. In this case, the business implication for CX practitioners is this. As you're refining your strategic roadmaps, make sure a plan to experiment into accelerated Gen AI use cases is front and center. And use it as an opportunity to remind your organization of all of the amazing outcomes already being driven by machine learning engines and predictive AI models. With that, I will now hand it over to Helen to expand on the last key takeaway.
Thank you so much, Steph. Well, I have to say that passion certainly shone through, and I have actually previously appreciated quite what a governance geek you are, and I mean that as a compliment, just so we're clear on that. And thank you for that great advice you shared. Seriously, some really true words of wisdom there. So now we're actually heading to one of my favorite topics, our third big topic, which is about the coming together of EX and CX. And we've been talking about the power of aligning EX and CX since the early 90s. Gosh, that dates me, doesn't it? But only now are we really seeing those disciplines coming together. And there's still, it has to be said, a really long way to go. But let's start by getting a hold on maturity levels. As we ask CX professionals about CX maturity, we also ask EX professionals to assess their own organization in terms of EX maturity. Nico warned you, just 1 in 10 consider their organizations leading, so gold standard. And by leading EX maturity, we're talking full EX strategy in place, supported by defined analytics, wide-ranging research programs, and so forth. You'll recall that the CX equivalent was 15% claiming to be leaders. Now, there's a fairly even split between EX maturity defined as practiced at 47% and foundational level at 43%, the latter being basic. So really minimal EX strategy and only very basic measurement in place. So less mature than CX for sure, but not massively so. There's very little of any difference between B2C and B2B and some variation by sectors, but no standout leaders. Of note, construction and energy sectors are among the least EX mature, although of course within each of these sectors there are the exceptions. Indeed, I was only talking to one such construction company client earlier this week, and you know who you are, and I would certainly define you as a leader. The point being that this kind of assessment needs to be done at an organizational level rather than making any so-called sectorial assumptions. Now, leading companies, of course, think about employee and customer experience as a whole. The role of employees needs to be a central consideration when designing CX strategies, and the end customer should always be a central focus when designing employee strategies. What you see on this slide are bars representing from left to right those who are foundational, practiced, and leading in terms of EX maturity. And then the stacks represent the extent of CX maturity. So among those who are EX leaders, 44% of them are CX leaders. Put another way, EX leaders are almost 10 times more likely to be CX leaders than are those at the basic end of the scale. The message continues to play out. When you get it right with your employees, as you know, you're more likely to get it right with customers. You heard from Nico that as the value of CX and EX is increasingly recognized, so there continues to be increased focus and with that increased spend, thankfully. Here we take a look at the story in relation to levels of EX maturity. EX leaders are absolutely more likely to anticipate an increase in investment in EX and indeed CX in the next 12 months, including spend on training and CX-EX measurement, as they are more likely to expect recognition at board level to increase. There's a different story in relation to size of teams, but nonetheless a significant number are pointing to increases in team size, suggesting we're all going to be competing for the same experienced talent that's out there. I think some of us are already seeing that out there in the marketplace in some of our markets right now. You're in demand as CX professionals. Now, you heard from Steph that CX professionals have 3 standout priorities: their strategic roadmap, personalization, and closing that CX promise delivery gap. Asking EX professionals what they expect to be prioritizing over the next 12 months, you get a different picture. Developing, refining the strategic roadmap is absolutely still in the top 3. Closing the gap between employer brand promise and the employee experience is in the top 6. But we're seeing more priority areas which are in line with that low level of employee experience maturity we've identified. A quarter point to better educating their organisation about EX. Really, do we have to? It appears we do. A fifth have EX ownership near the top of their must-sort list. Now, I'm delighted, of course, to see better linking EX and CX in the number 1 priority spot. The desire by some to improve integration of EX and HR data on the radar at 18%, and better linking EX and operational data at 16%. But staying with the basics and recognising there's still work to do, almost a quarter also recognise the need to focus on driving better insight from employee listening data. So what's that employee listening data telling them? Well, 3 in 10 are seeing improvements in employee engagement performance over the last year, and within that, 7% can be proud of big improvements. Huge variations by region. Nico, in LATAM, we're seeing 4 in 10 pointing to improvements. Steph, in North America, just 6% saying the same. Now, no doubt some cultural bias at play, but I'll leave you with that one as people leaders in your regions, and no doubt in the audience, you're comparing how you stack up. Twice as many EX leaders can point to improvements, 41% versus 22% of those at the basic or foundation level. And of note, the sharp-eyed amongst you would have worked out that 2 in 10 EXs said they did not know or did not track employee engagement performance. So just giving you a time check here, we are 25 to the hour and we will be completing this webinar at 1:45. So only a few more bits of information to share with you. And then if we do have time for questions, of course, we'll do that at the end. But keep those lovely questions coming and we'll have an opportunity to come back to you directly as needs be. So staying with tracking performance levels, annual engagement research is still the norm, with 70% doing so. No difference B2C versus B2B, but that figure highest at 94% in North America, and the UK is not far behind. At the other end of the scale, only 16% are doing DEI, that's diversity, equity, inclusion type research, although we're actually seeing demand for that rocketing amongst our clients who have recognised that they have so much to do in that space and need support. You'll recall that only 42% strongly agreed that their company provides an inclusive and equitable environment for all employees. So on that note, I wouldn't be surprised if that 16% were not higher next time around. As an aside, I was reading a great paper from Ipsos last night, which looks at the key strategies for addressing inequality, how research can help understand and close the gap in inequality. And you might want to check that one out on ipsos.com. We thought it helpful to delve a little deeper into the types of life cycle research being undertaken. You can see here that 26% are doing so. And you can see at the top of that list is research amongst those exiting the organisation. Perhaps we're missing a trick given the lower levels of research among new joiners, among returners. So I'm very briefly going to add an EX maturity lens here. You can see that EX leaders are more sophisticated, as you might expect, in the nature of employee research that they're undertaking, especially in the case of leadership diagnostics. We're talking about the likes of 360-degree assessments here. You'll recall that the #1 priority among EXers, although by only 20%, was the linking of EX and CX data. We can shine more light on that need here as it becomes apparent that 37% are never analysing those data sets together. When we know that 70% are doing annual engagement research and see that only 13% are looking at the data sets together once a year, this reinforces that need for it to be on the focus list. How often are you doing so? In line with this lack of data collaboration, there is a wider issue. Less than a fifth can point more generally to a strong and ongoing collaboration between CX and EX practitioners. Oh dear, it's not a good picture, is it? Let's move to solution mode. What are some of the things we can do about that lack of collaboration, that lack of alignment? Let me introduce you to the forces of CX as one way of building those EX-CX bridges. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, the forces of CX, it's a human-centric framework developed by Ipsos, which is concerned with the drivers of emotional attachment. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, the more emotionally attached you are, or I am, to a brand, the more likely I are to stay with it, spend more money with it, recommend it, and indeed forgive it when things go wrong, as they sometimes do, and indeed as we've seen in those admissions of failure to deliver on promises. To bring the forces to life from an employee perspective, as an employee of Ipsos and one who is emotionally attached, then I would absolutely recommend Ipsos to you as an employer. You see what I did there? We have openings. And I've been here happily for 10 years, so that speaks volumes. Anyway, so through extensive R&D, we identified 6 key dimensions, and you can see them here, which we then validated to be strong predictors of emotional attachment and relationship strength. If you'd like to know more about those, you can see a link to the paper on the screen. But just to make one of those more tangible, as an example, fair treatment is about making customers feel there's a fair exchange in the relationship with you. For employees, it's also about them feeling fairly treated. The thing is, as a truly human-centric framework, the forces of CX can create a common vision and call to action across employee and customer experience. And we'll see shortly the importance of having that aligned vision. Again, a quick nod to the EX maturity lens here. There is a relationship between EX maturity and perceived levels of performance on both employee on the left and customer forces on the right. The same is true by levels of CX maturity. That theme again, experience maturity means doing the right things by employees and customers. Leaders are doing better on the things that most matter, go figure. But of course, step one is understanding what really matters to your employees and customers, the relative importance of each of those aspects for your brand, and then designing experiences accordingly, and then delivering on them to drive the desired behaviors, reduce churn, increase advocacy, and so on. Just a couple more slides for you, and let me just take this a little bit further and explore what we're calling the employee customer ripple effect. We've said doing the right thing by customers, or rather doing the right thing by employees, is doing the right thing by customers. When employees' core relational needs and forces are met, they're more likely to exhibit good behavior towards others and forge healthy relationships with customers. Companies performing well on specific forces among employees tend to see higher scores on the same forces among customers. This slide reinforces that point by taking a closer look at the force of belonging. So just defining that first, it's about helping customers feel a sense of belonging, show that you care about the greater good. For employees, it's the likes of connecting with your company's values. Now, the percentage of companies saying they perform highly on customer belonging among companies who say they are performing highly on employee belonging is over 4 times higher than the average. It's showing that crucial importance of investing in creating healthy relationships with employees so that they are far likely to be able to do so with customers. So we've looked at the forces of strong relationships and the interplay between EX and CX. We've talked about the forces as being a route to building a common vision and a call to action across the organisation. Here, we're looking at those EX professionals who believe that the values and brand promise made to customers and employees by their companies are aligned on the left or different on the right. The percentage of companies saying that the experience is worse than promised, that 48% figure, is 4 times higher when the values, the brand promise and so on, are different versus when they are the same. And there's so much more that supports this point. In short, it's crucial for brands to be clear about their purpose, the story they want to tell, the memories they want their employees to create and their customers to receive and share. It's about standing for something and aligning brand building initiatives and experience design and delivery around those core values. So we went pretty deep there, and we've only got a couple of minutes left, and there's so much more I'd love for us to share with you. But with an eye on the clock, let me draw back and remind ourselves of some of the very key messages which you can see on the screen that we've shared, ending, of course, on that importance of collaboration. On which note, here's my final plea. EXers and CXers, let's get it together for the good of our people, our customers, our businesses. Let's ensure our vision, our values, our promises are aligned and deliver on. Let's drive for that strong and ongoing collaboration. I feel like I should have a flag here because genuinely together we're better. Now, we don't have time for questions. We are just approaching the 45 minutes. We got very excited about all this information, but we will be coming back to you on the many, many questions that you've shared. We'll be sending you a copy of the recording, the deck. And as I say, do look out for those local invites. Get in touch with your local Ipsos experience representative or the team here. You'll see the email in a moment on the next slide if you would like us to take your team through the insights here and what they mean for your organisation. But for now, thank you so much for spending time with us here today on our Ipsos Global Voices of Experience webinar. It's been a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you, Nico. Thank you, Steph. Thank you to our very large audience. Bye, everyone.
Bye.